I'm Olivia Newton-John, and this is One World. Coming up on One World.
The Jessica was a fuel tanker and had not been into Galapagos very frequently. It was at night. She probably got confused which light on shore was the actual heading light to enter into the port, and that put her over some shoals and she ran aground.
Darwin wrote about the hostile forces of nature, but 150 years ago, he never could have imagined anything like this. These are the last gasps of the wrecked hull of the Jessica. And just as the ocean reclaims her, our memories may also fade in time. But the lessons from this spill will live on. When we return, we'll find out how such a small, relatively small spill could have such a big impact on protecting our one world.
One World with Olivia Newton-John is presented by the Ford Motor Company, proud sponsors of the America's Cup, and made possible in part by the generous support of One World Challenge, pursuing the Cup in the name of the health of the world's oceans. Keep the course, guys.
We'll be right back. These are the Galapagos Islands, playground for pirates, watering hole for the old whalers, and a classroom for the study of all living things.
Galapagos is a really fascinating place. We have an extremely high number of endangered species and possibly extinct species in Galapagos. And these are all species that are just found in the Galapagos. And it's probably unique on a world scale to have this number of endangered species in one area.
Es mágico porque estoy rodeado de naturaleza, de aire fresco, estoy rodeado de algo mágico, que solo pocas personas tenemos esa suerte. Ahora la tienes tú y seguramente la vas a percibir al simple hecho de mirar un paisaje o ver a unos animales. Es mágico.
The Galapagos belong to Ecuador, but they also belong to the world. And in a geologic blink of an eye, humans have moved in and made our claim here fast. Of course, the person who truly introduced the Galapagos to the world was the great naturalist Charles Darwin, whose theories on evolution were so explosive and controversial that when they were published in the mid-1800s, it sent a wave of scientists and theologians here. The first real human rush to the islands. In the beginning, they visited, and then people started staying here to research, to fish, to live. 20,000 now call the islands home, and of course they need food to eat, oil, gasoline, boat fuel, flown in from the mainland, but mostly brought by ship. I'm Olivia Newton-John, and this is San Cristobal, the fishing center of the archipelago and one of the few islands in the Galapagos inhabited by humans. Out there is Wreck Bay, and it's called Wreck Bay for a reason. There have been many shipwrecks there, dating back to the times of the buccaneers. But back then, when a vessel ran aground, the impact was primarily financial in nature. But now, when these things happen, it's nature herself who is impacted.
The Jessica was a fuel tanker, carrying fuel for local boats and production of electricity in the Galapagos. She also had a heavier type of diesel fuel called bunker, used by one vessel in the Galapagos. The Jessica, while she had carried fuel a lot in the past, had not been into Galapagos very frequently. and entered into the port on the right heading, but perhaps half a mile to the west. And that put her over some shoals and she ran aground. Now, as time went on, the vessel began to list, and once salt water gets onto the deck of a carrier, that salt water can get down into the tanks and floats the oil out. In other words, oil floats on top of salt water, and that began the spill.
When Darwin arrived on the Beagle, the ship was powered by wind and lighted by whale oil. When the Jessica arrived, it carried 160,000 gallons of diesel and 80,000 gallons of bunker fuel. About 170,000 of all that spilled into these pristine waters. Fortunately, the currents took the oil directly west, away from most of the coastlines. But although the environmental contamination was minimal, it was widespread. 79 sea lions were affected by the spill, but all were saved. And thanks to the quick response of researchers and individuals and organizations around the world, a real tragedy was averted. When Darwin arrived on the Beagle, he saw animals living in what seemed like perfect harmony with each other, with very little predation. In what Jacques Cousteau would a century later call the closest thing I've ever seen to the peaceable kingdom on earth. It was truly like a Garden of Eden to young Darwin.
El recuerdo de Galápagos como un mundo natural, un mundo que no ha tenido alteraciones, con una interacción correcta entre el hombre y las especies que viven aquí. Los animales son los dueños de este espacio físico que existe en esta parte del mundo. Nosotros somos los que hemos ingresado a este espacio físico. Los animales no tienen que adaptarse a nuestra forma de vida. Yo pienso que es el ser humano, el habitante de Galápagos, el que tiene que adaptarse a la forma de vida de las especies que existen aquí. Los efectos directos que se produjeron luego del derrame del buque tanque Jessica, las especies principalmente afectadas fueron los lobos marinos, que en la bahía Naufragio de San Cristóbal son muy comunes.
Brown pelicans, as individuals, were at great danger from being fouled by the oil. But the populations of brown pelicans in the Galapagos are extremely high and in a very, very good state. Lava gulls, on the other hand, one of the rarest seabirds in the world, there may be as few as 400 or 500 lava gulls in all of Galapagos. That was a species that was probably of primary concern to us because there are so few of them that if you foul one, your impact on the whole population is very, very great. So the species that we feel were probably most impacted as individuals are brown pelicans, marine iguanas, and perhaps Audubon shearwaters. Now, of course, there are many other invertebrates and fish species that could also be impacted. The impacts were not spectacular. We did not see hundreds of birds covered in oil. But with the marine iguanas, what we found is that it's a very subtle level of stress, and their hormones that they produce when they react to stress were elevated where perhaps as much as 40% of the population of marine iguanas in Galapagos could die. That's not to say that 40% is going to die because of Jessica, but we've been able to identify marine iguanas as one of the species that is having these sort of hidden impacts. In other words, an animal doesn't look like there's anything wrong with it, but in fact it was impacted by the oil spill.
Las corrientes de Galápagos en este sentido favorecieron mucho a que esto no impacte demasiado en las costas de las islas. El momento que esto se contaminaba demasiado, no, era tremendamente perjudicial, porque en primer lugar la pesca de Galápagos no hubiera tenido ninguna acogida, y a nivel nacional peor internacional, ¿no? Lo que de una manera el sector pesquero hubiera sido más afectado.
With all the activities that you have going on and all the things you're trying to keep an eye on, then you have an oil spill. How did that affect you? Did it catch you off guard?
It was terrible because it's something that we never thought could happen in Galapagos. So in that sense, yes, we were caught off guard. I think the response, once the accident happened, was as good as it could have been. Really, the Park Service did a tremendous job of just mobilizing everybody, all their own people, but all the community as well. And the tourism sector, the fishing sector, everybody was helping out. And we at the station were trying to do what we do best, which was to help on the technical side, the wildlife management, trying to find if any birds, sea lions, whatever, were affected, trying to help save them where necessary. Fortunately, there wasn't very much of that. Also trying to track what's happening with the spill itself and then plotting where it was advancing to, transferring that to a geographic information system and looking at currents and winds to see where the spill might be headed. So the work that was done was good work, but we weren't prepared before. We didn't have a contingency plan. We didn't have the equipment on site to deal with the problem.
So what have you learnt from this, and what can we do to prevent this happening in the future?
Lesson number one is, of course, be prepared for this again. Galapagos is now subject to much more movement of ships and airplanes and so on than before, so we need to be prepared for accidents.
Efectivamente, la ley de Galápagos contempla en una parte de su ley que usualmente tiene que tomarse precauciones, pero lo que pasa es que en eso fallaron las autoridades de control. No aplicaron esa parte de la ley y ahí está el resultado, ¿no?
One thing that I've been amazed by in the Galapagos and in the world in general is how many ships do go aground in general, whether they're oil tankers, whether they're freighters. There's, right out here beside us, there's a freighter that went down in 1988. Boats run aground on islands, and it's largely because of human error.
Y como cualquier ser humano o cualquier empresa que es manejada por seres humanos, hay errores. Lamentablemente este accidente se produjo y esto ha llamado la atención no solo a los ecuatorianos, sino al mundo entero. Esto fue una experiencia que, sin lugar a dudas, fue muy dolorosa en un principio, pero solucionable. Pero una experiencia que nos trae futuras soluciones para no volver a cometer nuevos errores.
Today the Jessica is rusting away. What's left of her will become an artificial reef, a very artificial reef. This was not a catastrophic spill. We were lucky. But just the sight of a tanker run aground in these beautiful Galapagos Islands, a place many people consider to be the Garden of Eden, that was a shot across the bow, a wake-up call. For you, I'm sure this was very painful. And around the world, people were very shocked when there was an oil spill in the Galapagos. It was like, how did you feel about this?
Yo me sentí muy triste cuando pasó esto, ¿no? Porque aquí los guardaparques, los que trabajamos en la oficina, ponemos, además de lo profesionales que somos, ponemos nuestro corazón en el trabajo, nuestra mística como parque, tenemos la conservación en nuestra sangre. De todas maneras, la lección que nos queda es tener siempre un plan de contingencia y tener los aparatos mínimos que se puedan necesitar para atacar directamente el problema cuando esto sucede.
The air that we breathe, the atmosphere, the creatures of the ocean, the flowing waters, the fisheries, the wandering animals, those belong to all the people. Everybody has a right to use them. Nobody has a right to use them in a way that will diminish or injure their use and enjoyment by others. The Galapagos is an international treasure, an international jewel. Nobody has the right to destroy. And it was greed, cost-cutting, short-term cost-cutting that destroyed an international resource, and that is an act of theft. They've stolen something that belongs to our children.
We felt violated. We were extremely lucky with this oil spill. I mean, I don't think we could have been luckier, except perhaps for the spill not to have occurred. But what the National Park Service realizes here in Galapagos and what the Charles Darwin Research Station is trying to help the National Park Service do is be prepared for the next spill, not hope that there won't be another one. You have to realize that probabilities are multiplicative and additive. They're not single events. So if the chance of an oil spill per year is 1 in 1,000, chance of an oil spill in 2 years is 2 in 1,000. Chance of an oil spill in 3 years is 3 in 1,000. So these probabilities pile up on you. Eventually, you'll have an oil spill, as long as you're moving fuel in the ocean and you're moving it through these Gardens of Eden, as you say. The best way to protect the Gardens of Eden is not to move fuel in them.
Next on One World. Now that this has happened here, it shows that it can happen anywhere in the world. What can we learn in the rest of the world from this?
Well, okay, an oil spill is one specific kind of threat that's related to shipping, but there are lots of others. The invasive species problems could be things coming in the cargo, it could be things coming in the hull of the ship, invasive marine species that can cause tremendous problems. We're trying to establish here a much firmer approach to dealing with all the risks that shipping poses. And I think there's a lot that we do here that is relevant to the rest of the world.
One World will be right back.
a Galapagos dove. It's a very tame bird. There used to be thousands of them here in the Galapagos Islands. When Charles Darwin came to the Galapagos Islands, he said that he was sitting on one beach and there were many of them around his people and all his group. Now they have been almost wiped out from the inhabited islands, and the reason is because there is many feral pigs, dogs and cats brought in by people which are eating them.
Ciertamente el ingreso de nuevas especies a Galápagos de una forma no natural y muchas veces traídas por el hombre nos está causando graves alteraciones en los ecosistemas que existen actualmente en Galápagos. Nuestro trabajo está enfocado a proteger todos los ecosistemas que existen actualmente y a Galápagos en general.
Here, like in nowhere else in the world, you can have a relationship where animals have no protection against you, they have no defenses. And it's like, as a mother you would know, there's a baby there which calls on all your natural instincts to look after that. And so for Galapagos we need special laws. The special law of Galapagos created the marine reserve. And one of the things that it allowed Galapagos to do, for every $100 that you as a tourist pays when you come in, we have 5% which goes to a very new program, important program, which is quarantine, so stopping the influx of introduced species. So tourism is actually paying for the management and conservation of the islands.
The park and the Darwin Station are also trying to stop the onslaught of non-native vegetation like the plants that are wiping out the food these Santa Cruz tortoises need to survive. It's a problem that dates back to the time of Darwin, and one shared by marine systems around the world.
And one of the things that we've been trying to do is to set up our own little quarantine inspection system for Galapagos. We're used to having these inspection systems at national borders, but now there's one when you come into Galapagos, and there are things that you're not allowed to bring and things that you are allowed to bring. Because the best way to deal with the invasive species problem is to prevent them coming in the first place.
My name's Tom Copeland, and I've been fishing in Prince William Sound for the past 40 years. I was active in the response to the Exxon Valdez spill. Out of that experience, we formed the Regional Citizens Advisory Council. It has 19 board members from all the spill-affected communities and interest groups that live around and work in Prince William Sound. And, we've been very effective in our mission, which is the safe transportation of oil. You have to admit, those who have the most to lose are the ones who should make sure that things go right. We know more about what's going on than anyone else. We are the history of Prince William Sound now, and so when there's a complex issue to be decided, we're the ones who are teaching both the government and the industry what's going on, what the bottom line is. The most difficult thing about responding to oil spills is that they are so infrequent. So how do you maintain your readiness for it? And the signal lesson that we learned in Exxon Valdez was that the people who are by far the best able to respond to oil spills are commercial fishermen. Speed is essential, and you know, we're indigenous. That's the thing that counts. We're there, we're ready to go, and no outside force, be it government or industry's best intentions, can replace that. In the Galapagos, local citizens who are going to be there and whose #1 priority is protecting the environment in which they live and make their living, if they're empowered and organized, can be instrumental in maintaining a safe regime for the environment. Down through the years, after people have forgotten about the Jessica, there will be some people who remember it, and those are the people who are living on the Galapagos. Those are the people we have to figure out a way to empower so that it won't happen again.
I think the most important thing to learn out of the instance with the Jessica is exactly what we've learned about introduced species. If we can keep alien species from getting into the Galapagos, then we don't have to have programs on how to eradicate them. If we can keep oil spills from happening, we don't have to have programs on how to clean them up. It really involves reducing those kind of activities.
So just like the voyage of the Beagle, the ill-fated voyage of the Jessica may lead to an evolution in the way we think about our one world.
Toda mi vida la he vivido aquí en Galápagos. Y aún así todavía yo no conozco bien a Galápagos, porque cada cosa que veo siempre me llama la atención, ¿no? Yo pienso que lo que veo yo ahora igual quiero que mis hijos lo vean en lo posterior, ¿no? En el futuro.
From the Galapagos Islands, Ecuador, I'm Olivia Newton-John.